This is great. So
You're live.
we're live. Hey, we're live. Look at that. Well, this is how this thing should start with me and Drew and Landon. So, hey, Facebook world, we are excited. We had a different podcast scheduled for today, and it got a little sideways based on a couple conflicts we had with our guests to make this happen. But when I looked at possibilities of what we could do, I thought about a couple previous or coming breakfast speakers. And I reached out to the one, didn't hear from him right away, which I needed. And in about 16, 18 hours, we went old school. It seems weird to say when I'm 50 and these guys are considerably younger than me, but we went old school with a couple guys who we go back with. One 13 years ago in the early days of the gathering, Landon Wade, and Drew Flam. Drew, gosh, what is that, like probably 10 or 11 years ago?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's jump right in. I got a lot of things I want to throw your way. It's funny when
So I just want to make sure I got this correct. Landon and I are the backups of the backups of the backups.
No. That is not.
And also not a future speaker.
And also not future breakfast speakers.
The only way that happens is if you guys blow it, because I was already thinking this could be moved to a lunch series as well. So trust me when I say you're anything but A plus. You're only A plus. And I already thought about this moving to a September lunch series. So if you don't want that, maybe you better screw up a little bit.
Well, listen, I was my wife's backup too, and that worked out all right for me. So,
Drew, what would Steph say about that with you? Were you either one of you each other's backups?
You know, I'll say this with my wife, who is, pure as the winter snow. I was her first boyfriend ever. So
she knew she better not mess that up. She knew that was gold right off out of the gate.
I guess.
Wow.
If you saw her, you'd still go, I'm not quite sure how that guy got that girl, which is true of Landon, by the way, too.
Yeah.
it is. I outkicked my coverage for sure.
You know, we real quick on that. It's funny. I feel like we're kicking right off, and nobody even knows anything about you guys. But because I have such dear love for both of you, we're just going to go this way. I think we make that comment with guys a lot about outkicking the coverage, about overshot, got better than I deserve, all that kind of stuff. And there's some fun in that sometimes. But I look at both of you guys, and obviously being in a small group with Landon and Rebecca for a number of years. I know them pretty well. And then Drew and Steph, we've obviously stayed with you guys multiple times. Alex Pinkleton, particularly, Jaden as well, but they love the Flam boys. And I just think you guys both have, by no means are they perfect marriages, but they're marriages where I can learn a lot from both of you, even though you're younger than me. And I think neither one of you have been married as long as me. How long have you been married, Drew?
I'm coming up on 14 years.
And Landon, how long for you?
We were 15 years in March.
Okay, so I got both of you beat by 4 or 5 years, but nonetheless, the way you guys have leaned in and done it well and worked so hard at it, I mean, yeah, I think we got to figure out how to stop that language to some degree about kicking our coverage, because I don't know that it really helps our wives out when we do that. But enough said on that. Let's move on. I've got a lot I could say.
Probably a valid point.
Yeah, and I want to encourage you guys. It's funny that you make the joke, Drew, about the backup to the backup to the backup. I mean, we have had it as good as it gets. We had Mike McDormand with Eric and I the first time. Then we had Jeremy Hudson and Brian Heck and myself. I think Eric was a part of that one. Then we had Eli Williams, Malcolm Davis, and Darren Blakely, my board chair, talking about the race issue. And then last time we had Scott Sauls, who's one of my favorite writers, pastor out of Nashville, worked closely with Tim Keller. And walking over here, I thought, no disrespect to any of those people, but I might be more excited about this podcast than any of the others. And it's partly, while I have great relationships with those other guys, I definitely have a long history with you two. And the fact that when we knew we were going to have to punt on today with Scott and Scott, and we were coming with you guys, I thought, oh, crap, there's no way. Not with these two schedules, especially Drew's. There's no way we're pulling this off in less than 18 hours. And here we are. So Landon, I would have manipulated. I would have said Landon owes me for something. Any number of things.
Well, I told him yesterday, he was pretty quick to say, Drew, that your schedule was a little harder to work with than mine. So I took that personally.
Yeah.
That must just mean you manage your time better.
I doubt it.
Well, I knew that put a little.
I like this because it's the only way I get to see Drew. I think this is the first time I've seen Drew's face in a long time.
Oh my god, yeah, it's for sure. I mean, besides just keeping, mainly Pinkleton's been the one keeping me updated on you, so it's good just to
likewise.
get together and chat with old friends.
See, what's funny is if you know the joke about the plan B or backup or whatever. I think if Bill Brown, Todd Roberts, Pat Rastatter, or John Beckett could get on this call right now, seeing who's on here, they jump in a heartbeat. Pat's right across the street at Security Bank. He might hop on ASAP. So hopefully none of them are playing around on Facebook right now because they might show up or want to do something. But hey, let's get down to business. I want to talk to you guys about a number of things. So you guys were, not that you were little babies in the womb by any means of imagination when I knew you in the early days, but life has changed and a lot's happened. So tell people initially just kind of where you are right now, what's going on, and maybe ties, date it back to the gathering and then move it forward to now. And we'll start with Landon.
Yeah, so I moved to Louisville about, I guess it's 7 years ago, which is really hard to believe. July of 2013, we moved down here, and there was at the time I was still working with my dad, and did that from 2013 to 2015, and circumstances dictated it was time for me to move on in 2015. So in May of 15, I started my own business, and we've been doing that down here for 5 years. I always say that now looking back, it's really clear to me, like, God had a plan for me to come down here. At that time I came kicking and screaming, and that's probably putting it mildly. I really liked what we had going in Springfield, and obviously Jeff and many others. I had a lot of friends, still have a lot of friends from there. And, it was kind of hard to pick up and go on from there. But I think that, it's been a hard 7 years really. But it's been very developmental for me. And I think I remember Dustin Hughes had kind of prayed over me when I left, and I remember sitting down with him, and I kind of said, we'll go down there for a few years and we'll come back. And he said, I don't know. And he started doing a little bit of math with me, and I started, maybe he's right. And I remember though, he really prayed over Rebecca and I's marriage, and just kind of said, that I pray that we would become one, that they would become one flesh, being Rebecca and I, one flesh through this. And I think in a lot of ways that's happened. So a lot of other reasons, I think the move was made, and we've benefited from it. But if that's the only one, it's probably the best one. So,
wow, catch us up with you, Drew, and then we'll go back to gathering ties.
Yeah, so very similarly, same time frame. July 2013 is when our family moved from Xenia, and so I worked at Cedarville for a number of years. Was a Cedarville grad myself. Great time. Loved the time at the institution. And for both professional and personal reasons, it felt like it was, time to sort of get kicked out of the nest a little bit. And we were also adopting our first child, our now oldest son, Jaden, at that exact time.
Love that kid. Love that kid.
Yeah, he's a cool cat. We were wanting to get closer to family, so we moved up here to northern Indiana. I now work at Grace College, which is very similar to Cedarville in many ways. And so I've been here now 7 years at Grace. We've, adopted another son, had another son by birth. We got all shades and sizes of boys running around tackling each other. You might hear them in the background even. So it's
you got to make sure we get to see those guys. By the way, if Landon's probably at his office. I know Steph might be there, but I meant to tell you ahead of time, and I forgot to text you that I want to see those three boys.
Well, I'll text my wife and tell her to send them in. So we've been up here. It's been great. It's been, not easy by any means to make all those changes, to take up roots and try to establish new ones. And one of the things, and I think Landon might resonate with this too. Once you have kids, it is much more difficult to create strong relationships and bonds with others because your time is limited. When you're single, when you're growing up somewhere, you got all the time in the world to just be with people. And, when you have kids, it takes a lot more effort to really invest in relationships with others. And I think that's one of the beauties of the gathering is just it provides that entree for men to connect with one another in a way that benefits their families as well. And so, you're not just going golfing. You're connecting and bonding with other men for a greater purpose. So that's been one of the difficulties for us as a family is just creating those roots here as a family. So yeah, little catch up on what we're doing as a family here in northern Indiana.
Love that area, Winona Lake. It's a beautiful place.
It is.
So let's tie it back to the gathering in the early days. It's funny the description that Eric used to title this was old school guys, old school but young guys, and two pivotal people in us even being here. And I love to make the relationship connections are Todd Roberts and Bill Bigham. So get us to how you guys got connected with me in the gathering, and then kind of your involvement while you were here. So we'll start with Drew this time.
Yeah, so I was thinking about that, and funny, my first interaction with the gathering was out of a bit of disdain, and it was because of you ready for this? Clark Kellogg. You had invited, I didn't know who you were. I didn't know who Jeff Pinkleton was or the gathering was, but I ran the golf outing at Cedarville, and we were thinking of bringing in Clark Kellogg to speak at the golf outing and do chapel. And I was told I couldn't because some guy in Springfield had already booked Clark Kellogg to come speak at some breakfast and then do chapel at Cedarville. And I was like, well, what does some guy at Springfield get over me? I work here. And so, it was kind of like, well, why don't you get together with this guy who's bringing Clark Kellogg in and, figure it out. And so got together with Jeff, and he said, well, come to this breakfast and hear from Clark, and went to that breakfast and was just kind of blown away. I had grown up, in Christian circles, primarily Christian high school, Christian elementary, Christian college. I mean, everybody I knew was sort of in Christian ministry. And so I go to this breakfast and there's these business guys. And soon realized that living your faith, no matter where you're at or what you're doing, that was what the gathering was all about. Clark Kellogg spoke. I got to meet him. I still remember that he, later in the day, I ran into him again and he remembered my name, and I was blown away by that. And I got to see the gathering. I was a skeptic walking in, but I got to see the gathering sort of up close as a guest of Jeff's. And after that day was bought in, was like, wow, this is a really amazing way to have an impact on families, on businesses, on church, on the community. And our relationship just developed from there. And I got over the Clark Kellogg thing and became a gathering champion.
Although there's a great picture of you and Clark that I absolutely love. I wish I had it on my phone right now, where you guys were at the breakfast together and there was a picture, and that's a sweet memory. I love that story. I was going to make sure you told it if you didn't, about him seeing you several hours later and still remembering your name. So what's interesting?
I come up to like his belly button, but you know.
You know what's still very interesting to me about the difference in you two with that is Bill Bigham, who was never involved in the gathering really, other than tying into Cedarville and having to be at an event because that was his role. And we've always been, we know Bill. I mean, Drew, you worked for him. He's always been very honest. Like that type of DNA of getting together with a group of guys regularly and sharing your life, that's not him at all. Where Todd Roberts, who connected Landon and I, he was one of the first guys involved. He helped get the ball rolling. He was a part of some early conversations. So that was more who Todd was, but it really wasn't who Bill was. And yet both those guys are pivotal in our relationship. You guys' involvement in the gathering, you guys have been, as you use the word we love, champions. You guys have been champions in every way. So Landon, kind of bring it, full circle. Talk about your initial connection through Todd. There was some great stuff that you were kind of processing, and it was kind of the perfect storm, right time, right place, based on you coming out of Cedarville and not really going forward with the Lord. And then you kind of pick it up from there and then talk about your involvement leadership-wise during your time here with the gathering.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about it. I think that my great uncle Rick was actually the first person to tell me that I needed to meet you.
We have a rule that you cannot mention Rick Wade's name in a podcast, so we're gonna have to edit that. No,
edit that out.
We love Rick,
but I really do. I think he was the one who said, hey, you need to meet this guy. But early on, I guess this would have been, 03, 4. I mean, I can't even remember, 4 or 5, something like that. I met Todd, and the story about how I met Todd was actually kind of funny. I was reading, I'm trying to grow a business in Springfield, and I was reading, whether it was the Springfield News Sun or maybe the Dayton Business Journal, and there was an article about CFA networks that they had at the time. And I remember seeing that he and Kevin had graduated from Cedarville. And so my conclusion was, well, I'm going to call on these guys because I'm a Cedarville grad. They can't tell me no. They got to at least see me. And I remember I went in, and I think that if you recall, they did like some sort of car race downtown. The Rotary did way back when, Grand Prix or whatever. And I remember that I did some swag for CFA, and that was really how I got started with Todd. And this was actually when they were over by, they were in their original office, which is now a dental office, and then they ended up moving downtown. But Todd really took me kind of under his wing, I think, within the community, and then introduced me to Phil Scott. And I think all of that led me to you. And then I remember the first thing I did was, it was I think maybe, if not the first, one of the first locker rooms. Oh, yeah. And it was, Blake Schaefer, myself, you, Derek Theodore, and I think even like Greg at
Johnson,
one point,
Greg
from Salvation Army towards the end. And, I just remember at the time, like I was, I was the opposite of Drew. I grew up in public school and never, went to a small Christian, small church, but it was, pretty data driven church is probably the way to put it. Like it was teaching, not a lot of, worship really. And I was very much like kind of on the fence is probably the best way to describe it. I remember coming into that locker room. I think one of the first things I said was, look, I'm coming here to be who I am. And if I'm worried about saying, that I did something over the weekend or whatever, and everybody's going to like, Kyle Eidelman talks about like the judgmental sigh, if I'm going to get the judgmental sigh, this is not the place for me. And, cause I really was just trying to figure out, who I was and what did I believe and why I believed it. And then being involved in the locker room is kind of what led to me getting involved with the organization on, and other levels. So,
yeah, you chaired the board for 3 years. I think people there for a while were thinking Jeff Pinkleton, Landon Wade, Jeff. I mean, it was kind of an inseparability type of thing. I can't think.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
What'd you think? Say it again, Drew.
That's what I thought. Yeah. I mean, you guys even have the same stubble and everything.
Yeah. Nobody's ever claimed that I'm like any famous actor. We'll let Landon talk about that off script. The famous actor he's been accused of being of, or maybe people can comment in the comments section and guess who they think that famous actor is. But nonetheless, I think I love with almost every story of anybody that's been a great champion, there's been a connector. There's been someone who made the connection. And I think it's always funny to hear Drew tell his story that way. And there's numerous stories, but he's so pure-hearted. Anybody knows Drew just loves his heart. And yet you can see kind of woven in and through that, there's motive for business, or there's motive for connections, or we got to get some Cedarville people, some people tied to Cedarville and his development role or whatever. And I tell people all the time, that's fine. Like if you do something really well, why would you not bring that to the table? I mean, nobody's coming here only because they want to grow in Christ. And, Landon, I've always said about you, one of the things I appreciate is that could not have been a more perfect storm. I mean, that first meeting, I think it was me, you, and Todd, all three at Panera, you were just really honest, and you said, look, I went to Cedarville, and I really had no desire or purpose in growing in Christ. But I kind of feel like now I'm either going to do it or I'm not. So I knew that the scales could tip one way or the other, but you were as ready as you were going to ever be. And I've said it before, I could have never landed on a conversation with anyone that if they were willing to go the full direction, it was going to play out the way it did. And it had every opportunity not, because you were clear about, like you said, I'd forgotten about that, but you were pretty clear about you were kind of wanting to know judgment zone. You were not mature on any level based on your own admission, and yet it really went somewhere. So let me speed this up a little bit. So, we don't talk about the gathering sometimes in this podcast as much as we could or should, but with you guys, I feel like we're going to dive a little deeper. So if you can look back over your time involved with the gathering on many levels. I mean, Drew, we're going to talk about the monastery in a little bit with you, but how did that time involved, if that would have never taken place, if you would have never been involved in a gathering, what would you miss about right now? And I say right now, I'm not talking specifically to COVID. I'm just talking about in your life. What was the value added to you based on your time involved in the gathering? Let's start with Drew, and then we'll hit Landon up second.
Yeah, so I was young, mid 20s, and as I mentioned, most of my influences um, had been within Christian context. So seeing this mix of community, business, faith, family, church, it was really neat for me to be around guys who were outside of my typical circles, whose faith looked a little bit different, who were along various spectrums of their spiritual growth. I think of some of the folks that were really impactful to me, like Scott Griffith. I got to be a part of seeing Scott come to the Lord, and his interest in the gathering, even before coming to Christ, was like business expansion. He gets engaged, and just to see him come to Christ and just explode in his faith and the generosity of that man, and the purity of his heart and his love for his family and his community. I mean, it was really impactful. And long trips on drives to the monastery with him, and just seeing guys that were my age up to those in retirement still wanting to make a difference for Christ in their community. I hadn't seen as much community Christ connection before than I had seen in the gathering. And that was hugely impactful for my spiritual growth. And to this day, impacts how I live and try to engage my community.
That's cool. Man, that's succinct and that's good. I love that. Landon, how about you?
Well, I mean, for me, it's like when if I go down the list of guys that I still talk to and guys that have become very important in my life, I mean, it's hard for me to find many of them that don't have a connection to the gathering. So, I think about going to when Barry Black spoke at Emmanuel is when you introduced me to Dustin Hughes. And, Dustin and I don't talk often, but Dustin's become somebody that is just somebody that I just love. And he and I have had many, many, many wonderful conversations. And, like I said, he prayed over me that time.
By the way, you
and
can't mention Dustin by name either. I've told Dustin recently that
I should have been provided a list.
Yeah,
Well,
here's what's funny.
I can't mention.
Dustin will see this later, I'm sure, because he's now on Facebook, which blows my mind that Dustin is on Facebook. But the number of guys that are involved in the gathering because of Dustin, and he's not really been involved in a couple years. And I'm like, Dustin, man, you got Brandon Ellis and you got Landon Wade who believe in you and love you and are tied to the gathering and stronger involved because of you, Jason Hill.
Yeah.
And I'm like, come on, man, you got to get back involved.
But I mean, even beyond that, my relationship with McDormand, because I remember sharing a room with Mike down in Celebration, and that I connected with Mike through the business community. But to Drew's point, there was a different type of connection that happened through the gathering where you sort of transcended business, and it was the fusion of both. And so then I was able to kind of push my personal relationship with Mike forward, and that happened with Tom Rue and with a lot of guys that I had great respect for. Obviously, guys I had I grew up in Springfield, so these are guys names that I knew for a long time, that I ended up having the opportunity to build relationships with, and then not the least of which is guys like John Beckett, who I met directly as a result of. I mean, I was an accidental ad, kind of like I was here at a lunch at Cedarville.
You know what's funny about that? Could 3 people respect John Beckett more than the 3 of us?
I mean, yeah, I would say he's very high on my list. I mean, Jeff, I shared with you yesterday that he was with me through the transition out of my family business, which was not easy, and there was some things going on relationally with my parents at that time, at the exact same time, that was very difficult. And they ended up getting a divorce. And John, I mean, I had the opportunity to be on the phone with John Beckett, walking me through some of that. And
real quick, let me just, so people might not know who he is. John Beckett, longtime businessman up in Northeast Ohio in Elyria / North Ridgeville, wrote a book called Loving Monday that was huge. His second book that wasn't as big called Mastering Monday, and we got access to him through Bill Brown down at Cedarville. Then Drew and I did a conference together with Cedarville in a gathering called Loving Monday. We brought in a neat group of speakers, Craig Boehner. Who's the guy from Cincinnati, Drew, that's at the Underground Railroad Museum? I'm blanking.
Oh, you're right. I don't remember.
Craig Boehner. Craig Boehner was great. But, I mean, I still take people once, sometimes twice a year up to see Beckett. He's been great for you, Landon. Drew, I think, I mean, if you reached out to him today, he'd probably get back to you. I mean, you talk about a man of God and a guy of great influence that has, very hit and miss but nonetheless deeply impacted each of our lives. I mean, certainly me and Landon, I know we've spent some time with him, and
Yeah.
Drew, I know where you've had exposure. It's been a blessing as well.
I haven't kept connected with him individually, but I still have a row of his books on my shelf that I hand out like candy.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive. But go ahead, Landon. Sorry about that.
And beyond John, guys like Rob Root. I mean, I guess the point is, and then even when I got here, this is how connected Jeff is. I get to Louisville, and next thing I know, I'm having lunch with Ronnie Cordray, who's the men's ministry pastor at Southeast. I have I've had lunch a handful of times with Bob Russell. That's directly attributable to Jeff.
We got to share some Tim Young love in there too, because
Tim Young. And I actually still have some clients as a result of that connection. So
the funniest businessman in Louisville, Kentucky, by the way.
he's a trip, no doubt about it. But for me, it's difficult for me to kind of take really close relationships that I have and not find a connection to have them kind of come out of the gathering. So.
Well, we're going
to. It's been very, very impactful for me.
Well, let's keep tying that together because our tagline is connecting men to men and men to God, and to me that's pretty generic. I mean, it fits us pretty well, but it's a generic thing. And we'll start with Landon since I know where you are with this, and Drew, you can tie this in because I had lunch with you and some guys probably 2 or 3 trips ago when I was up at Winona. But Landon, you've really taken that very seriously. I know your goal was to get a gathering started in Louisville, and that hasn't happened. But some of the DNA and where locker rooms and young guns are huge for us, you've definitely bit off a chunk of that there in Louisville. So talk about how the tagline connecting men to men and men to God has been still a very active part of your life right now.
Yeah, when I got here, I mean, the locker rooms meant a ton to me. I mean, I thrive off of being around guys, especially guys that that are authentic and genuine, that I can have real conversation with and sort of break down the facade that can sometimes be there in Christianity and actually, really work through some things. And so when I got here, I didn't have that. And so I met a guy named Carson Clements down here and through Ronnie Cordray, actually. And Carson is still one of my best friends to this day. And I floated the idea. I said, hey, listen, I know it's sort of informal, but this is what, this locker room thing, I used to do this up at home. What do you think? And he said, yeah, so we had a breakfast, and gosh, it's been 3 or 4 years ago. So, now we had to transition with COVID. We used to meet on Friday mornings in person for coffee, and we've done that for 3 or 4 years. There's about 4 or 5 of us, and we've transitioned that to Zoom call, or we do, I think it's FaceTime actually, but and so we've been doing that for several years. And then when at the start of COVID, I had met another guy down here and kind of floated the idea just about how important it was that Christians were praying and and doing that together. And he really felt like, he agreed. So now I have another group of 4 guys on Wednesday mornings that I do a call with. So, 2 mornings a week, I've got a group of 4 to 5 guys that we're jumping on, and we're either reading scripture, we're going through a book, we're, whatever. And I've got to say this too, man. I mean, just so it's clear, anybody who's watching, like I just want it clear, I'm still a mess. I'm still got a lot of things I'm working through.
Welcome
and that's
to the party.
that's why I need these groups, because I do not have it all figured out, and there's still a lot of things I struggle with. And these groups have been really important. And where does it go from here? I don't know. It's never really gone much farther beyond just these groups doing these calls, but now it's 2 and it was 1. So
good word. Drew, talk about that, man. I've been to church with you. I love both of you guys are great churches. Like if I was at Louisville, I've told Landon, if I could go to any church in America, it'd be hard pressed not to be Southeast. Sorry, Fellowship. I love Fellowship. But and Drew, you're at a great church too. What's it called? The word Point.
Mission Point.
Mission
Yes.
Point. Yeah, and I love your pastor. But speak to connecting men to men and men to God with you, because like I said a couple years ago when I was there and we went to lunch that day, some of your guys we had lunch. But what does that phrase mean to you, and how does that have implications in your life?
Yeah, it's 2 sides of the same coin. I think for guys, a connection with other men is a vital part of our growth and relationship with God, which is the ultimate purpose. Just connecting guys to guys, that's networking. But for the purpose of ultimately connecting men to God and his greater purpose. And, you even look at how I was reading this morning in Luke 9, and Jesus sends out the 72. And how does he send them? 2 by 2, right? I mean, it's never like one person off by themselves. Jesus is always in the business of sending people out in groups. And it was one of the things I got to see from the outside. I lived in Xenia, so I wasn't a part of the Springfield community. But watching the gathering on the outside, we had a Xenia group that we got together with and built some great relationships there. And now moving here, that was something that was vitally important for me. And through my church is where those relationships were built for me. Guys that I got together with, those groups have changed, the people have changed, but it's all for the ultimate purpose of relationship with one another, ultimately so that we can build stronger relationship with God and grow in our relationship with Him. And so I think that I will always, for the rest of my life, know that that is important, to have close relationships with other guys. And that was burned into me by Jeff.
You know what's interesting? I've been reading a book with some guys called The Christian Man by Patrick Morley, who's definitely one of the staples in men's ministry. Started, which has been an early gathering locker room group book, Man in a Mirror. So his latest is The Christian Man. And he says in there, this is very interesting. I'd be curious what you guys think about this. I'm going off script now. If a man,
you have a script?
Hey, come on.
Your life isn't a script, is it? Oh my, okay.
You got that ahead of time, by the way. If a man has a Bible, and obviously he's saying it's being used, and a small group, and is serving someone or something, 90% of their problems will be taken care of by themselves. And when I look at guys and they don't have one or two of those elements, you can kind of see that play out. And I love what you said there, Drew, about kind of the turnover, the changing, and how it plays out different ways. But any guy I know that's successful and fruitful and living the abundant life God has for him, there's a group of guys there. I mean, clearly God's word being active and living and penetrating his heart and doing the work that only God can do through the Holy Spirit is key. And obviously service is huge, but that small group of people is huge. And I love how you guys said that. Now I want to shift gears because I know with both you guys I can speak to this, and this is one of the biggest things I believe in life, and certainly within the gathering, is retreating and getting away and having margin. And I could speak to this with both you guys in different ways. Landon, you've been a part of so many different types of retreats. And when you were my board chair, I mean, we did everything together, it felt like. And like Drew said, you couldn't think of one without the other. And Drew, you really dove deep into the monastery. I mean, even to this day, we've taken over 60 guys, maybe closer to 70 guys to the monastery down in Kentucky. And you're as much a champion. You and Scott Griffith and Chuck Hall. I just lumped you with Scott Griffith and Chuck Hall. You can run with that however you want to run with it. But you three have been just great champions in the monastery. And you really dove deep in those times there. Life plan, evaluating your life, taking more. What's the importance in your lives now, then, throughout? Mark Batterson uses that phrase, change of pace plus change of place equals change of perspective. Let's start with you, Drew. Talk about retreating and having margin to take a look at your life and take stock and evaluate and retreat.
Oh, man. I went to the monastery at a time in my life when I had plenty of margin. I was married, but no kids. And so, I had plenty of time. And yet I'm not even sure what drew me, except for maybe the opportunity to be, around a cool group of guys and try something new and different. And you got down to this monastery, and I hated the first about 6 hours. I mean, bored out of my mind.
I tell everybody you got to get past the first 2 to 4. The first 2 to 4, if you're not familiar or you're closed at all, it's going to be tough. But
it was rough, and I think we went on like an NFL playoff division weekend, and I'm like, this is terrible. Then after about 6 hours, I mean, you get into prayer and journaling. And I think what's important is to go in, at least for me, with a goal. Like at the end of this, what are some things that I want to have thought through, prayed about, considered, journaled? Not just kind of flounder about, but have an end goal. And for me, it was the life plan. Michael Hyatt has the life plan. And I went down there, and at the end I had some sort of direction, had prayed over it, had thought about it, came back, talked to my wife about some goals and ambitions and things I'm learning and ways I want to grow spiritually, physically, financially, professionally. And it just became a yearly rhythm. Go to the monastery, look at the life plan, evaluate what's worked, what hasn't worked. Since then, I haven't done the life plan as much, or I have done the life plan. I haven't done the monastery. So I still get away somehow, some way, whether it's for a half a day, a full day, every year.
Get more
I have
detail.
an
Get
account-
more detail about that, Drew. Like, what does that look like? How do you plan it out? I mean, how do you protect it? Because I think that's important for people to hear.
Yeah, well, for me, it's about a time of year. So it's usually November, December, right? It's that turn of the year. I now have an accountability partner with my life plan, have had that now for 3 or 4 years. Found a guy who was doing the exact same thing with life plans. And so we just said, hey, let's talk about this every, quarter or so. We'll get together and see how we're doing. So for me, it's every November, December, get away. Last year, I went to Florida. I was
Whoa,
going to
whoa, 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 Landon. Let's figure out how
I've upgraded from the monastery.
where in Florida did you go?
I was in the Fort Myers area. I was attending a conference, but I had time by myself during that conference because I was attending it by myself. And so I used that as my life plan evaluation time.
Well, hey,
Other times,
hey, Drew, for what it's worth, and Landon, I think Bob Schumann is listening on here from West Palm Beach, who ran a gathering for years and is a hero of ours. Maybe he could help us do this by letting us stay with him in West Palm Beach, and the three of us can figure out how to get down there. And Bob, we want you to make that happen for us. So
there, that would be that would be an upgraded version of the monastery.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes it's just meant going to Starbucks for
half a
the day.
Okay.
Or half a day. It's looked different. But the key for me has always been just to get away with no urgent matters to care for, but to look at the life plan not as a did I check all the boxes correctly, but as an evaluative time to say, what's this last year been? What's gone well? What hasn't gone well? What's the Lord taught me? Where are areas I'm struggling? Where are areas I can improve? And then it becomes a conversation piece, whether it's with my wife or whether it's with my accountability partner, to say, hey, these are the areas where I see like I'm failing. Do you see that as well? Hey, these are the areas where I want to grow. Do you think those make sense? Again, don't just do this on your own. It's again in relationship with people. So yeah, that monastery experience really has built into me a desire and a rhythm of yearly life planning.
Yeah. One of the things I speak to with that, like I'm wearing today my Chris Hartenstein New Frontier Ministry Montana shirt, and my McDormand has the same one. It's a different color Montana hat. And that's my A game. Like I can't look sharp like you guys and have a sweet pair of glasses like Landon, but I can bring my Montana gear. So I know for me when I get away, like I was just on vacation in Delaware. When I go to Montana, I'll read a book, like Tozer last year, Montana. I forgot any number of books I just read in Delaware. They mean something more to me when I'm away. I've read Batterson a couple times being away, and his book will just line up perfectly with having that time for reflection. So, Landon, speak about retreating. I mean, you definitely think a lot. You have you're whether it's worldview, whether it's political, whether it's scripture. Talk about either specific experiences with the monastery or other retreats, or just the priority and importance when you do that, maybe what that looks like for you now.
Yeah, I mean, I did the monastery once, and probably Drew captured it pretty accurately. I like hanging out with guys, and it was something different. And I wanted to try it, and I've looked at doing it a few other times, but hadn't worked out. But honestly, I have to be honest, man. I mean, planning is something that I have never done very well, and it's very hard for me. I find that I probably tend to gravitate towards just the doing. I do things better than I plan, and I haven't really set aside time to retreat in a long time. Now, I will say that I joined a business group last year, and sort of, so it wasn't necessarily like spiritual plan, but like there's an entrepreneurial operating system is what it's called, EOS. A lot of business people are familiar with EOS, and so we started to implement that like kind of in the business at the end of last year, and that was the first time. It was hard to believe, but that was like the first time I'd sat down and tried to plan for the business. Now, I dovetailed some personal planning into that, and but that's just. I mean, unfortunately, I wish I could come on here and be like, hey, I can give you this great story about all these retreats that I've done that have helped me do that, and that is just an ongoing battle. And I think it's probably just like I said. I mean, I always give the example of like, I hated mowing the grass when I was a kid, but I love it now. And I think the only thing I can come up with is that I like the fact that I can start and finish something in an hour, where in my life I feel like there's so many things that I'm trying to accomplish that I haven't accomplished yet, or that just don't get done that quickly. And so and maybe I just retreat to the doing for the comfort of it. It's like I know how to do that. I know I can complete tasks as opposed to sitting back and reflecting.
But Landon,
And
I would say it was funny. I was thinking about this call. I wrote something down about you prior to this call, and it was about the
uh-oh.
and I think it's that's what's great about relationships, because with you, one of the things I highly respected in getting to know you is like you were just like, well, let's go kill the lion. Let's go. An idea would come up and we thought it was good, and I wanted to have a planning day, and you were like, well, let's just go do it. Like if it's good, go get it.
Yeah.
And I think there's good balance there, because I've always highly respected you for that aspect of like, it's kind of like David, right? It's like, well, there's the giant. Somebody needs to kill him. I'll do it. Let's go.
Well, it's funny as you say that
about you.
As you say that, I think about you and Scott Griffith being similar, me and Landon being similar, because we definitely, I felt like you described me and Scott, you being Scott and Landon and I being similar. Let me
I will say that I need to say this. I think Drew makes a great point, and that is, and again, I think that's the way God kind of intended it, which is, we all have things that we're good at, and if we do relate with each other and we do it with authenticity and consistency, then some of the strengths that a Drew has can fill in some of the areas where I'm weak, and vice versa. I can, this is his words, not mine, but I mean, maybe I spur him on to action, and then he spurs me on to planning. And
No doubt.
I think that's. I mean, again, we didn't design it that way. God designed it that way. And I think when we do relationship the way God intended for it to be done, that's some of the stuff that comes out of it.
Yeah, definitely sounds like you're describing some scripture there about who we are as the body. So let me Bob Schumann, by the way, says, Jeff, North Florida is easier to reach. But Bob, you're not in North Florida. So if we want to experience you and we want to be encouraged, we have to come to West Palm, not North Florida. So quick little clarifier there. Let me ask you guys
Jeff,
this.
he loves to travel. He loves to travel. Tell him to come on up.
Or let's go do it at Wrigley Field. While we can't get in, we could still experience Chicago together, because we can all make Chicago.
I'm a Cardinals fan. I'm not going to Wrigley.
Hey, I have to say, Bob, Rebecca and I went down. It's probably been a few years ago, but we had dinner with Bob and Margaret down kind of, because we vacation in Vero Beach, and then about halfway in between is West Palm, and Bob and Margaret came up and he bought me lunch or dinner, and I had my kids with me, and he endured all of that. So
wow.
It's been a long time since I've seen him. But.
There you go. Got to give a shout out to Bob. Let me ask you guys this. So I love talking transitions, and I think there's probably people on this who are watching or will watch who are maybe in the midst of or could go through a transition. And Landon, I remember being at your house. Every time I drive by your house, which is close to where I live, I think about that day you're leaving. And Drew, I think about right before you left, being at El Toro there over by the green, and being with a bunch of guys and good friends of yours, and people. Some of those people transitioned as well. What do you think? What's the one quality or characteristic of Christ that He has put in you that would have not happened if you would have stayed local? And maybe start with Drew and then hit Landon.
What is one characteristic that God has grown in me by being willing to
move?
To move.
Yeah, and having to trust Him, because obviously, Steph's family's there, but there was still a lot of safety and comfort here. Much the same with Landon, probably more so with Landon because he's from here. But what has happened in your life, and how have you grown in Christ? The number one way you would say that wouldn't have happened if you would have stayed comfortable.
I think one of the things I had learned through that transition was knowing why you're making a transition. So if your primary motivation to make a transition is professional advancement, that might not work out for you. But if your primary role is because you're feeling called and because it's what's best for your family, I have found every time I make a transition move based off of what's best for my family and for our pursuit as a family of Christ, it tends to work out professionally. Frankly, my transition away from the Springfield area to northern Indiana was not a good professional move. You wouldn't have looked at it at paper and been like, that's a great move professionally. But it was a right move personally, and it has worked out professionally to be a good move as well. And I think that's a lesson that I've learned the hard way in some transitions, where I can be sort of a ladder climber type of person. What's next? What's next? What's next? And to think of it through the lens of how does this best help me and my family pursue Christ, not how does this look good on my resume. I recently saw a guy who was kind of promoting like build your life resume, and I think there's good intentions behind it, but I'm like, in the end, 100 years from now, nobody's going to have any idea who I am. What's going to matter is, what I did for Christ and how I built into those closest to me, my family and my closest friends. So that's certainly one thing I've learned and grown from.
It's something you just said, Drew, that's really that speaks to me is you talked about not being known years from now or whatever. I read somewhere recently where it talked about really 2 generations out, nobody's going to know who we were. And I love the Todd Wilson quote. I think Todd Wilson gets credit for it about the importance and the value of growing fruit on other people's trees. It might even date back to like, I forgot who the one business guru is that people give a lot of, Bob, I'm blanking on his name, but
Buford?
Bob Buford, yeah. But I think, that's kind of what you're speaking to there. I mean, Mark Batterson says that, you want to be loved and respected most by those closest to you. And I think as you say what you're saying, some people who don't know you could listen to that and say, oh, that sounds good. But I know you. You do that. That's how you live your life. Your words are magnified, what you just said in that soundbite, by who you are. I mean, I know you do that. I mean, as you were talking, I kept thinking about when Alex and I have been there, and Jaden the one time, like when we get into our room in your house that we stay in, and there's little mints, and there's a little note or something, and you and Steph I'm like, man, what bed and breakfast is providing me? Nobody. I'm getting loved on. And I think you guys really model and are a great example of that. So I hope people catch. If people don't listen to nothing else we've talked about, that was gold what you shared. Landon, how about for you? And I know you've spoken many times to me on the phone about while it's been hard and while there's been challenges and you've left a lot of comfortability, you definitely made this decision to go, largely due to Rebecca. And what has God embedded in your DNA that wouldn't have happened if you would have stayed here?
Well, I mean, gosh, we could do a whole other hour on that, but like, the word that I can't come off is just humility. I mean, I think that God has just really delivered a tremendous amount of humility. Now, again, it's always weird to say I'm humble. I'd have to have some people verify that, but I know that, when you take something that you've worked to build, for so long, and then you move, and then through other things that happened, it ends up going away, and there's just I think that I came down with just a lot more probably pride and arrogance than I realized that I had. And it's funny, I think I even mentioned this to Jeff, as I recall, Drew, I feel like one of the first times you met me, you said you weren't a big fan of mine because you thought I was that way a little bit, and we can talk about that in a second.
Drew's smile doesn't mean anything, by the way, right now.
But I think, I said this to somebody the other day. I said, and I really had to kind of come clean with my dad on some of it too. Like where, there was a time when I really thought I had it, all figured out, and I know that I don't now. And I mean, the older I get, I'll be 40 this year.
You're young.
Every day that goes by, that I think I realize I know less instead of realizing I know more. And it drives me into, I think, conversations like this, conversations with Jeff. I mean, I just don't think that I would have had nearly the level of humility delivered to me. And I think if this transition down here had not happened, and in much the same way, I think Drew mentions, I mean, I don't necessarily think on the surface it was a great move professionally, but it has ended up being a wonderful move for my family, for my marriage especially, and it has worked out, professionally. And I think, again, that's very much God's heart. I mean, he's very clear with us. I think sometimes that's one mistake we all make. We think that we maybe have a little bit more control over God's plan than we do. Like if we, make one left turn when he wanted us to make a right turn, somehow we derail the whole thing. And I think he's been very clear with me, like, my plan for you is not dependent on the fact that every now and then you don't follow it to the T. I can work with all of it.
You know, what's interesting is you're talking, Landon, and same with you, Drew. I was thinking about our three kind of core values of the gathering up to this point in our ministry. It's been an affirming culture, intentional relationships, and lifelong learning. And I think both of you really embody that to me on many, many levels. I mean, I hate that when someone leaves, and I went through a stretch with you two and David Willey and Bill Brown and several guys left seemingly around the same time. And that was really difficult for me. I'm like, man, I hate, losing these guys. And I've tried to keep up where I can, but I think with both you guys, it's looked a little different with each of you, but there's definitely been that keeping up. And one of the things I respect and appreciate about both of you so much is you guys are both lifelong learners. You are committed to growing. You are committed to learning. John Wooden has a famous quote about the day you die is not the day you physically die. It's the day you quit learning. And I just can't imagine that's ever going to apply to you two's lives. So let's speak to, I know based on where you guys are in life, I'm thinking about our young guns right now and their wives and where we kind of really connect with these guys over the last 5 years that are early 20s to mid 30s. Speak to this whole idea of the work, home, family, ministry, life balance. Carrie Newhoff says there's really no such thing as the balance. Mm-hmm. It's really about passion and being passionate about whatever area when you're in it. So maybe Drew, speak to that first, then Landon. Let's try to keep these to about a minute and a half because I got two more things I want to discuss with you guys before we wrap. So Drew, speak to that in your life with Steph and Grace and all the above.
Well, I mess up on it a lot. That's the best way to learn is fail forward, I guess. But I don't like the word balance either. I tend to use the word, and it's maybe more of a businessy word, but management, like work-life management. There's times when there's stuff at work that's going to consume 16, 18 hours a day. That's not balanced at all. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's reality though. So how do you manage that with your family? Conversely, there's times when kids are sick or you got to run kids here, there, everywhere. And so, family is consuming a little bit more time and work has to be shorted a bit. So to me, it's about trying to manage all the, manage all the priorities that Christ has given us. And I like that passion. So, what are we showing we're passionate about by where we're investing time? So I'm going to stop because I'm about to cry, it sounds like.
That's a powerful cough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say, one thing that always sticks with me is, and I may not quote this perfectly, but John Beckett, I think his life purpose, he stated it as to honor God as a husband and a father and extend God's kingdom in the marketplace. And, here's a guy who's got about $100 million company. And again, his first thing is honor God as a husband and a father. And I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that he's done that. And so for me, I always struggle with structure words around family and stuff, because then it becomes like, I check a box to cut my grass and fix things around the house. I shouldn't wake up in the morning and feel like, there's these boxes to check. I mean, I've got to get to the point where, I don't like make myself go play golf, and create balance with these hobbies and things that I love to do. And what has to happen for me is I've got to get my mind aligned with God enough that, it's my family is my priority, and and that it just sort of happens because it's something that I genuinely want to run after each day and spend time with I have 3 daughters, and it is imperative, 12, 9, and 3. And I'm getting right into that zone where it's so important that I make sure I've got a deep connection with my 12, with all 3 of my girls as they get older. And so.
One of the things that I think is key in that, you just kind of alluded to it, and I know it's a little bit different, Landon, with girls. And, I know obviously with Rebecca staying home, she's probably able to do a little bit more that way. But I know with like Drew, I see it, and I've seen it when I've been there. Those boys of his are very involved in things. There was a news story they did on whatever local Fort Wayne news station, and Drew had the boys doing some science thing they were doing at Grace College. Oh my gosh, look at these guys. Speaking
hey guys.
Raymond Amon, there he is. Bennett, what's up? Look at those cute. Do you know who this guy is right here? Bennett, Raymond Amon, do you know?
Pinkleton.
Where's that Jaden kid at?
Man, I like that. I'm going with that one.
Where's that Jaden kid at?
Oh, you see him there?
Jaden, show me that smile, man. I want to see those teeth. Show us, Jaden. Get over behind your dad. Ah, look at that
There
smile,
it
man.
is.
That's one of the best smiles I know of right there. So, Drew, I don't know if you caught that. I just said, I think one of the things where you've been really key in that is you blend family and work as much as you can.
Yeah, these guys love going to great. Well, and it's an advantage of working out of college, right? So, there's students that we can engage with. They love going to Grace basketball games, going to
Grace wins every
camp.
time.
That's right. We love that song. Yeah, blending the two, and I think again that's where I think balance is an improper word because it sounds like it's an either or, and it can be a both and. You can figure out how to make your family a part of your work and your work a part of your family, and frankly, that helps build relationships. I mean, you get to know people better when you start to know their family, when you
Yeah.
get to know them on an individual basis, and I can be better at my job if my family's involved, and I can be better with my family if I allow them to be involved. So
Yeah.
yeah, we blend the two quite a lot. You guys love eating at Grace? We
Yeah.
usually eat once a week
Are
in the
you? I was just say you are still
cafeteria.
doing that about once a week. You're still.
Well, I mean, probably not under COVID restrictions,
Yeah.
but yes, prior to. I mean, just again, we get to. They are a part of the ministry that I get to be at Grace. And if you're in business, you're in ministry. So make your kids as much as possible a part of that as well.
Hey, Jaden, can you do me a favor and say hello, team gathering? Can you do that, Jaden?
Gathering.
Okay.
Hello, team gathering.
Yeah, that's that voice. I love that voice. What a great kid. Hey, we'll finish off with two questions. So, we all three have been blessed. I know. Drew works for a great boss, Bill K-Tip. Am I saying that right?
That's right. Yes.
Bill K-Tip, and you worked with Bill Brown, so you've had a couple presidents you've worked with that are great, and I highly respect and know the one much better than the other one. But what I know of Bill, I respect him. And then we talked about Beckett, and Landon's gotten to spend some time with Bob Russell, who I'm a big fan of, and he's given me some access as well. Maybe speak to one of those guys. Drew, you alluded to Clark Kellogg earlier. As you've had access to different people, and we're blessed to know people on very relationship-ended basis, and then some hit and miss one-shot deals. Speak to maybe how one person has impacted your life on maybe a hit and miss scale. Maybe start with you, Landon.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked a lot about Beckett, so I'll kind of move, maybe talk just even in the short time I've been able to spend time with Bob Russell. I mean, I think the thing that blows me away about the time that I've been with Bob Russell is just the incredible humility and how comfortable. I mean, I can tell you that I sat on the bench at Jay Alexander's the first time I had lunch with him, and I was legitimately nervous. Like, I mean, I was like, he was a big deal to me, and I was meeting with him, and I mean, within a couple of seconds, I felt like I was talking with an old friend. He just, and then it was great. I got an opportunity to kind of just ask him a lot about building the church, the process, and the time, and I remember even asking him this. I said, "You ever drive by that place on Blankenbaker and just go, how did that happen?" And he was very quick to say, "Absolutely." Like, and so there's.
Hey, real quick, Landon, real quick for people who don't know, we're talking about Southeast Christian Church, one of the largest churches in America. Not that it's about numbers, but he was like year 4 or so into that church. It was at 120. When he left, it was at 18,000. Then Dave Stone took it, I think, to like 22, 23,000. I think it's bigger now with Kyle Eidelman. And they're the poster child of how churches in America should transition and grow and, be very focused. And, there's nothing about Bob that would tell you he's done that. Like, he's just so humble.
Yeah. So for me, I think, seeing a guy who's accomplished what he's accomplished and how he carries himself and how he treats people has been a great lesson for me. And the other thing that I would say is, he's been very clear with me about the fact, like, he talks a lot about his dad, and he said, and again, I think I remember this story right, but, Bob's dad was the first guy in his family that really took a stand and said, I'm going to be a Christian. I'm going to be a committed Christian. And the way Bob tells it, and this is not derogatory to his dad, but he said, his dad didn't necessarily accomplish anything great in his life himself, but because of his faith, Bob became a Christian, and look at what God accomplished through Bob. And Bob does not take credit for any of it. And so his lesson to me was, you got those 3 girls, and you may do something great, and that's great, but you may also just be here to make sure that Ava or Claire or Nora are prepared to do something for him and accomplish purposes. And so that was I think that was huge, because I I was struggling because, and even to this day, I struggle at times because I have not accomplished what I wanted to accomplish in business. But yet, and don't get me wrong, we've done well, and I'm grateful for what we've done. But I think it was a great lesson that he gave me there. And I look at Ava sometimes, and Claire and Nora, and I say to Rebecca, I said, sometimes if the only reason I was put here was to give them to the world, then that's okay.
I love that. I was just talking to Jade, my oldest, the other day about exactly what we're talking about here. And I love the stories you read, and Drew he's probably seen some of these, like who led John Wesley to Christ? Who led Billy Graham to Christ? How did Abraham Lincoln come to know the Lord? Or, whoever. I just think those are so powerful because we look at this one person who did this, and then their fruit, however that transaction works in heaven, is going to be based on the person that one of my main mentors is Doug Harris, and I say often to him, like anybody that I'm getting credit for, or anybody that's like, wow, God used me in this person's life, Doug, that's your fruit, man. That's huge. Drew, what about you? And maybe if you're not sure who to speak to, I guess Bill Cada might be the guy to speak to, but
I could speak to a lot. One of the blessings, I'm in fundraising, right? So I get to be around a lot of successful people who have income that they want to be generous with. And those type of people are also generous with their advice and are generous with their time. And so I've just had the blessing of having so many mentors. But Jeff, I want to speak to one lesson you've taught me.
Oh my gosh.
And that's what I tend to associate people with the lesson they taught me. Here I can speak to different people and say, oh, this is the thing they've taught me. The thing, Jeff, that I think you have most taught me is how to be an encourager. I can remember very specific times, my mid-20s, and to this day you still do it, where you do two things. One, you'll say, hey, I was just telling so-and-so this about you, which means you're telling other people good things about me. That is unbelievably encouraging. Wow. And you would tell me that you were telling somebody else something good about me. You'd also say, hey, I was recently talking to so-and-so, and they said this about you. So now somebody else is talking good about me behind my back. Both of those ways of encouraging, of telling me how others are talking well of me and how you are talking well of me behind my back were unbelievable encouragements. You still do that to this day for me. And it's a lesson that I've learned and tried to take and do with others. Just tell them how well others are talking about them and how well I am talking about them behind their back.
I hope it's authentic. I know there probably is a little bit of a motive in me that makes sure I keep getting invited to Winona Lake and getting to hang out with you guys. So,
well, I would say I think I want to jump on to what Drew said. I think one thing I completely agree with Drew about Jeff, and it's, I think the thing I would say, I just finished reading the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek, and it's not necessarily a Christian book, but I think there's a lot of Christian principles in it. And I think the one thing I would say about Jeff with what Drew just said is, and I think that's one reason he's been very successful with all of this, is Jeff has always been very clear on his why, and he lives it every moment of every day. And that is, he wants what's best for other guys, and he's constantly working to make connections that he think will benefit everyone. And I think part of that, Drew, is that tendency to do exactly what you're describing. And I've been the beneficiary of the same thing. So
let's quit talking about, come on. That's my Doug Harris. Doug Harris used to always do that. Hey, you know what's interesting? I usually just interview you guys, but I want to make a comment for myself about someone in my life. Drew, you'll appreciate this. Kara told me last spring after our gathering breakfast, which sadly was the last one we've had with COVID stuff, but Clark Kellogg was back. And I asked Kara that day, I said, so what obviously Clark's been significant to me. I'll text him and he'll text me something the Lord's doing in his life, and he'll speak to rest and, all kinds of stuff like that. And I said, Kara, you've been around him a couple times. What stands out to you about Clark Kellogg? And she said, you know what? He genuinely loves you. And I was like, what? She goes, yeah, like when Pat Rastatter made some comments about me before he got up to speak and introduced Clark. And Clark said, when he was sharing that stuff, you could just see in him and the way he addresses you, he genuinely loves you. And I thought, why? I mean, it just seems so like surreal and an outer body experience. But I thought, I've always loved the story about him remembering Drew hours later. And, I think that idea of wanting other people to know how much you love somebody, that other people just see it. So that would be a Clark Kellogg impact in my life. So thanks for those words. That's encouraging. Lastly, and we'll close with this, Eric's probably like, wow, I wasn't planning on this podcast going this long. But you guys might have lives to live and business, some fundraising to do for Grace College and some gear and equipment and promo materials to sell. So I'll get off here. But lastly, Drew and Landon, what would you tell your 20-year-old selves? I love the Mercy Me song, Dear Younger Me. So what would you tell the 20-year-old Drew Flam and a 20-year-old Landon Wade?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that song because it's classic. I mean, there's that part of you that wants to go change a lot. And in my case, with challenges in the first 5 years of my marriage and challenges in my relationship with my dad and the ways that I handled things, there's a ton of things that I would love to take away. But they are also a part of why I've changed. And so it's difficult. I think I feel like if I was talking to my 20-year-old self, I'd just say, just settle down, just slow down, and I think, and just listen more. If you can do that, it's really difficult when you're that young, because what you really want to say is be humble, but it's not that easy. That's what I needed a lot more of when I was younger. I needed a little less anger probably, and a lot more humility. And if I could just figure out a way to get him to just settle down a little bit and just slow down a little, I think that would be what I'd try to do.
Before you answer, Drew, that's a great response, Lane. I'm gonna plug a different podcast. So Ryan Stevenson, who we've brought to Springfield a couple times and has gotten to be pretty close to Steve and Debbie Stuckey, he's got a new podcast out called Weathering the Storm. And he just had last Wednesday as his guest Amy Grant. So we're going old school Christian music. My friends Doug and Larry and Wally, we're big fans of hers and probably had major crushes on her back in the day. But she shared some stuff on there as a 59-year-old woman about exactly what you said. Like when she went through that transition of releasing the one CD that had Baby on it and whatever. And Ryan was really kind of drilling her, like, what was that like when people were saying you left your faith or you left the Christian music genre and all that stuff? And I just didn't get caught up in it. Maybe people were saying it, but I didn't think about it. And I leaned over. I'd heard it twice at that point, and we're driving back from Delaware the other day. I told Kara, I said, if I would have listened to this podcast when I was 20, this would have changed the arc of my life because I wouldn't sweat out some of the stupid stuff I get caught up in, feeling disappointed or someone said something about me or whatever. And I said, this could have changed my life at 50. So I'm right there with you with what you just said, Landon. Drew, how about you? What would you love to tell the 20-year-old Drew Flam, which is only like 5 years old?
Yeah.
You're 25?
Yeah, that's why I need some stubble. I still can't grow it like you guys. I would affirm everything Landon just said. One, I'd invest more in my marriage. Before kids, before some of those trials come of life, when we had time, energy, even some double income, no kids, like invest in some experiences. I wish I would have invested more in my marriage in those first few years. So I'd affirm that. I'd affirm the settling down. I tended, and I still do to an extent, as somebody who wants to climb the ladder, like what's next? What's next? What's next? What can I accomplish next? And just worry more about impact and less about what's next. Who can I impact? Who can I make a difference in their life? And less about what's the next rung on the ladder. And then humility would be huge as well. I wrote those exact same three things down because, as an achiever, I was arrogant. It's why I was ticked at Jeff for getting Clark Kellogg before I did, because I wanted Clark Kellogg to love me. Just humility in recognizing that, in the end, it's not about me. So the funny thing is, those are all lessons I'm still learning.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, we're at a close here. I love what we've talked about. I knew this was going to be fun. We're representing these 3 states, Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana. We've impacted each other's lives. Anytime I'm going to be around one of you guys or have a phone call or whatever, I know I'm going to be better for it. Like, it's funny because, you guys are both decent bit, half generation at least, younger than me. Drew, you're how old again?
38.
Okay, good. You couldn't be my kid. But I just know I'm a better person because of you guys. I'm a better man. I'm a better follower of Christ. I'm a better leader. And man, I think we could do this podcast every week, just the three of us yapping away about whatever. And really, really grateful for you guys in my life. So I want to close in prayer real quick. I feel like there's people that might hear this that we're touching on something that you guys have shared that's going to impact somebody's life that really allows them to have a better vision of a decision they got to make, or they might tweak something in their family. And that's just you guys being who you are and living the life you're living. So let me pray for us and we'll close. God, just thanks for Drew and for Landon and their impact on me, their impact as family men, as workers through Goodson Supply and at Grace College. And God, we just pray that the words that they've shared from their hearts that are of you, that you would use those to spur some things on in the lives of people who will watch this. That's men, women, children. God, just what a great thing it is to see the Flamboys on this video and on this screen. And God, we just pray that there would be great glory to you that comes through something as simple as this podcast. Just bless Drew and Landon and their families and their work and their passion for you in such a powerful way. We love you. We need you in Jesus' name. Hey guys, thanks again.
Amen.
We'll hopefully do this one again, and this might be one of our fall lunch series. So you're anything but plan Bs and backups.
Sounds good.
right.
Thanks, Jeff.
Blessed by you
Enjoyed
guys.
it.
Thanks,
Love you
Jeff.
guys.
Landon, good to see you.
You too, man.